The sky above the alien city was dark and red, filled with smoke and strange glowing lights. Crowds gathered in the central plaza, their faces cold, excited, waiting for something. In the middle of the square stood a tall metal pillar, and tied to it was a girl. Her skin was pale blue, her hair white like snow, and her silver eyes looked straight ahead, not crying, not begging, just staring. She was young, maybe 19 in human years, and she didn't say a word. Chains wrapped around her arms and legs, metal that burned her skin. Guards stood around her, holding weapons, their armor shining with the crest of the Empire. Above her, a loud voice echoed from a floating speaker. By the will of the High Council, the traitor will be executed at sunset. Among the aliens stood a single human man. He wore a dusty coat, a small bag slung over his shoulder, and old boots. His name was Carter, a former soldier from Earth, now a traveler. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had only come to trade parts, but when he saw the girl chained like that, something inside him snapped. She didn't look like a killer or a criminal. She looked lost, hurt, and far too calm for someone about to die. Then, as if she knew, her eyes met his. Carter froze. He had seen those eyes before, in a dream, in a vision. He couldn't explain. The crowd began to cheer. Some threw stones, some shouted for blood. Carter's hand slowly moved to the weapon. At his side, he didn't plan this. He didn't know who she was. But he knew one thing. He couldn't just watch her die. His heart beat faster. His mind screamed to walk away. But his legs moved forward. He pushed through the crowd slowly, eyes locked with hers. The guards noticed him. One step forward. "Back away, human," the alien hissed. Carter didn't speak. He just nodded and turned away, walking back through the crowd. But he wasn't leaving. He walked into a side alley, pulled out a small device from his bag. It was old Earth tech, but modified, an EMP pulse generator. He looked back at the square and took a deep breath. This was insane, he told himself. Absolutely stupid. But he pressed the button anyway. The EMP wave spread silently. The lights around the pillar flickered, then died. The weapons in the guards' hands sparked and shut down. Confused shouting filled the air. Carter ran, his body moving like old training kicked in. He leapt onto the platform, pulling a plasma cutter from his belt. Sparks flew as he cut the chains from the girl's arms. She didn't speak, didn't move until he grabbed her hand. "Run," he said firmly. And she followed without question. The crowd was in chaos, some running, some screaming. The guards struggled to restart their weapons. Carter pulled her down another alley, then another. The city was a maze, but he knew where to go. They ducked under a low wall, slipped into a small tunnel. He looked at her again. She was quiet, breathing hard, but not afraid. "Why were they killing you?" he asked, but she didn't answer. "Do you understand me?" He asked slower, and she blinked, nodding just once. They kept moving, deeper into the lower levels of the city. Carter knew a place, a friend who owed him a favor. They had maybe 10 minutes before the guards spread out, maybe less. He pushed open a rusted door and pulled her inside. It was a small room filled with old machines. He dropped his bag, locked the door, and turned to her. "You okay?" he asked, still breathing hard. She looked at him, then slowly stepped closer. With a shaking hand, she pointed at his chest, then at herself, then placed her hand gently over her heart. "I saved you," Carter said, "but I don't even know your name." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat trembled. Her lips moved, but silence. Carter frowned. "You can't speak?" Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. Still, her expression wasn't weak, it was strong. Brave, whoever she was, she had been ready to die without fear, and now she was free, but for how long? Outside, sirens screamed again. Carter loaded his weapon, glanced at her. "We're not safe yet," he said, "but I'll keep you alive." She looked at him with those silver eyes again, and for a second, he felt like this wasn't the beginning of a rescue. It was the beginning of something far bigger, something neither of them understood yet. The night wind was cold as Carter led the alien girl through the shadows. The city above them roared with alarms and flashing lights. He kept his head low, hand tight around hers, his heart still racing from what he had done. He had just attacked a public execution and rescued a girl he didn't even know. But something about her pulled him in. She didn't speak, didn't cry, but she moved with him like she trusted him completely. Her silver eyes kept looking around, wide and alert. Her bare feet barely made a sound on the metal floor. They reached a quiet hallway below the central city. Old pipes leaked steam, and the lights above flickered. Carter stopped and looked at her. "I know a place not far. We'll be safe for a while," he said. She nodded, breathing fast but silent. She pointed toward a small door nearby, then gave him a quick look. He tilted his head, unsure, but she moved to the door and touched the panel. The lock clicked open by itself. He stared. "How did you?" But she was already walking in. He followed her into the dusty room filled with broken tech and old crates. She sat down in the corner, hugging her knees. Carter stayed by the door, watching her and thinking, there was something strange going on. She had opened that door with a single touch, no code, no key, just her hand. He had heard stories about tech-sensitive species, but never believed them. He walked slowly over and sat a few feet away from her. "You really can't talk?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, and shook her head. He sighed. "Well, I've rescued quiet girls before, but never from a crowd of blood-hungry aliens." She gave him a faint smile, almost like she understood the joke. He reached into his bag and pulled out a protein bar. "Hungry?" he asked, and offered it to her. She took it slowly, her hands shaking. She broke off a piece, sniffed it, then bit gently. Her face changed, confused but pleased by the taste. "Earth food," Carter said. "Get used to it." He leaned back against the crate and stared at the ceiling. "I need to know what's going on," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He remembered the way her blood had glowed when he cut her chains. No normal alien did that, and the way the tech responded to her touch, it was like she was made for it. He looked at her again and asked, "What are you?" She lowered her eyes, like the question hurt her. Then she reached into the side of her torn cloak and pulled out a small glowing chip. She placed it in his hand gently. Carter turned it over, recognizing it instantly. It was military grade. But unlike any design he'd seen before, she pointed at it, then at herself. "You made this?" he guessed, and she nodded. Carter's eyes narrowed. "You're not just some random girl, are you?" She didn't respond, just sat still, quiet, sad. Suddenly, a loud crash outside made them both jump. Carter turned off the small light and grabbed his weapon. He moved to the door and peered through a crack. 3 guards were walking down the hallway, scanning doors, weapons ready. Carter turned back and whispered, "We've been found." The girl stood quickly, no panic on her face, just calm. She moved beside Carter and placed a hand on the wall. The lights outside the room blinked, then died completely. The guards shouted, confused. Carter turned to her, stunned. "You did that?" She nodded, and her eyes glowed just a little brighter. He smiled. "Okay, now I know I made the right choice saving you." He opened the back panel of the room, a tight crawl space behind the wall. "Come on this way," he whispered. She didn't hesitate, sliding into the space beside him. They crawled for several minutes, the sound of footsteps fading behind them. Finally, they dropped into another dark tunnel. Carter helped her up, brushing dust from her cloak. He stared at her again. "You're more than what you seem." She looked at him for a long time, then touched her chest. She drew a small shape in the air, a circle, then a slash. Carter blinked. "Is that your name?" She nodded slowly, and he smiled. "All right then, Slash. Let's get out of here." She frowned, then pointed at her symbol again. "No, that's not right." She tried again, drawing the shape slower. This time, Carter understood. It looked like a letter from an old alien language. He pulled out his translator device, tapped a few buttons. The screen blinked, and then said, Lyra, he looked up at her. Your name is Lyra. She smiled softly and nodded. Carter stood up straight, checked his weapon again. Okay, Lyra, he said. We run, we hide, and when we have time. You tell me everything. They vanished into the tunnel's shadows together, behind them. The city searched for the girl they thought was dead, but she was alive and with a human who had no idea just how important she really was. Carter didn't sleep that night. He sat against a cold tunnel wall, one hand on his weapon, the other near Lyra. She had curled up beside him, eyes closed, breathing slow, even without speaking. She had a strange kind of presence, quiet, but powerful. She didn't act like a scared girl, even after escaping death. And the way she could control machines with just her touch. That wasn't normal. Carter kept looking at the small chip she had given him. It was smooth, glowing softly, and shaped like a crystal shard. He held it under the light of his wrist lamp and turned it over. Symbols moved across its surface like they were alive, he whispered to himself. This isn't just tech, this is something else. He tapped it once, and suddenly, a projection blinked into the air. Lyra opened her eyes, and her hand shot out to grab his wrist. She looked scared. For the first time, Carter stopped immediately. I didn't mean to break anything, he said quickly, but she didn't seem angry, just protective. The hologram hovered between them, a map, maybe, or blueprints. Tiny alien writing circled a glowing core in the center. Lyra touched it gently, and the image vanished at once. She looked at him and shook her head, slow and serious. He nodded back. Got it. Not yet. She let go of his wrist, and for a second, her hand lingered on his. Carter looked away, heart pounding. He had fought wars, seen death, escaped prisons, but one silent look from her made his chest feel strange. They packed quietly and moved through the lower tunnels. Carter led her to an old warehouse near the power district. It was abandoned, full of rusted machines and forgotten crates. He knew the owner, a smuggler who had vanished months ago. They made a small camp inside, far from the main entrances. Carter set up motion alarms and covered the windows. Lyra sat beside a broken console and gently placed her hand on it. The screen blinked back to life with a soft hum. She turned and smiled at him like a child showing a trick. He laughed quietly. You're full of surprises. The machine showed a layout of the city's power grid. Lyra pointed at one glowing section, then at herself, then at the chip. You're connected to this, Carter guessed. The grid? She nodded, then made an X with her arms, then pointed to the council tower. He frowned. They tried to kill you because of this. Lyra hesitated, then gave a slow, sad nod. He sat down beside her. You were part of it, weren't you? He pulled out his translator again, held it between them. Show me, he said. She placed 2 fingers on the translator and closed her eyes. The screen blinked once, then her memory played like a recording. Carter saw it through blurry images, soundless but clear. Lyra standing in a lab. Machines surrounding her. Aliens in lab coats speaking fast, pointing at her, marking her skin with lights. They connected her to a tower, and suddenly the entire city lit up. Her body powered the system. Her mind controlled the flow. She was like a living circuit, a rare one. Then the image shifted, guards burst in, alarms blared, and she was dragged out screaming. Carter turned the device off, heart thudding. They used you. And when they feared you, they tried to erase you. Lyra looked away. Her hands tight in her lap. He leaned closer. But you're still alive, and I'm not going to let them erase you. Suddenly, the alarm on the window blinked red. Carter jumped to his feet, grabbing his weapon, outside. Shadows moved silent, sharp, too fast to be local patrols. He turned to Lyra. They found us. She stood quickly, eyes focused. Carter tossed her his spare pack. We move fast, no stopping. They ran out the back, slipping between crates and metal beams. But something was different this time. The pursuers weren't guards. They were dressed in black, no emblems, no armor. Assassins, Carter thought, sent to erase the last piece of evidence. One of them spotted them and fired a pulse blast. Carter dodged, grabbed Lyra, and dove behind a pile of scrap. "We can't outrun them like this," he said, breathing hard. Lyra looked around, then pointed to a broken energy tank. Carter followed her eyes and smiled. That might work. He tossed a small spark grenade at the tank, then pulled her down. A bright explosion rocked the alley, fire and smoke filling the air. Screams came from behind the smoke. Some of the assassins hit, others retreating. Carter grabbed Lyra's hand and took off again, through another tunnel, then down a sewer grate. They stopped deep underground, both coughing and covered in ash. Carter laughed weakly. "You really attract trouble, you know that?" Lyra leaned against the wall, her small smile returning. Carter looked at her then whispered, "What are we going to do now?" She didn't answer, but she stepped closer. She raised the glowing chip between them and placed it in his palm. She closed his hand around it and looked up into his eyes. And in that moment, Carter knew whatever this chip was, it was everything, and now it was his to protect. Carter didn't expect her to shield him. The blast had thrown him off his feet, and the air burned with static. But before his body hit the ground, Lyra had stepped in front of him, and something impossible happened. A blue wave of light burst out from her hands. It curved like a dome, wrapping around both of them. The assassin's energy shot hit the shield and vanished like smoke in the wind. Carter blinked, stunned, lying on the cold ground with dust in his mouth. He looked up and saw her standing tall, her silver eyes glowing brighter than ever. She didn't look afraid anymore. She looked dangerous. Lyra turned slowly toward the last assassin standing. The man hesitated, seeing the light pulse from her skin like liquid fire. Then he ran, disappearing into the shadows. The glow around Lyra faded as quickly as it came. She dropped to her knees, gasping, and Carter rushed to her. He caught her just before she collapsed. Her face was pale, her breathing shaky. "You used too much," he whispered, holding her close. He didn't know what she had done, or how, but he knew it had cost her something. He carried her deeper into the tunnels, farther away from the city, from the guards, from the death that kept chasing them. Every step echoed through the dark like a warning. He finally found an old metro station deep underground. Untouched for years, dust covered the floor. Vines grew through cracks in the walls. He laid her down gently on a bench and searched his bag for a stim patch. He pressed it to her neck, and after a few minutes, her eyes fluttered open. "You scared me," he said quietly, trying to smile. She didn't respond with words, but she lifted a weak hand and touched his chest. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper. Carter didn't say anything, just held her hand and stayed beside her. When her breathing returned to normal, he spoke again. "What are you really, Lyra?" She looked at him for a long time, then reached for the chip again. Instead of showing a memory, she tapped her fingers against the floor. Circles formed from her light touch, and a new image appeared. This time, it showed her as a child. Smaller, weaker, sitting inside a white lab room. Aliens in long coats stood around her, taking notes, hooking wires into her arms. Her eyes glowed even back then. They trained her to move machines with her mind, to think, to feel, to power buildings, and weapons with nothing but her thoughts. She was a living key to a system no one understood. And when she began to resist, when she stopped obeying orders, they decided she was too dangerous to live. The image disappeared, and Carter felt his fists clench. "They made you a weapon, then tried to throw you away." Lyra gave a small nod. Carter shook his head. "No more running," he said. "We hit back." Her eyes widened, surprised by the fire in his voice. He looked at her and smiled slightly. "You're not alone anymore." She slowly stood, her strength returning. Then something strange happened. She touched his hand again, and this time, Carter saw a vision, not a memory, not a map, but a dream. In the dream, they stood together at the edge of a ruined tower. Above them, the sky cracked with lightning. Below them, machines knelt, and power flowed like rivers of fire. She was showing him something that hadn't happened yet, or maybe something that could. He stepped back, the vision fading. He looked at her with new eyes. "You're connected to something far bigger than we thought." She nodded and turned toward the dark tunnel ahead. It was time to stop hiding. Carter packed his gear and checked his weapon. They had enemies, yes, but they also had a goal now. Lyra wasn't just a runaway. She was a spark, a piece of something ancient and alive, something hidden deep in the planet's network. And the only one who could unlock it was her. Carter didn't know where the path would lead, but he knew he would walk it with her. Not just because he saved her, but because something between them was growing, something he didn't want to run from, not anymore. The city's outer edge burned under a rising sun. Smoke climbed from broken towers, but the news broadcasts spoke only of peace. They did not mention the escape, the missing girl, or the explosion in the power district. They lied with smiles and soft music, as always. Carter watched the screen from a stolen tablet. Beside him, Lyra sat silent, tracing her finger on the metal floor. She had shown him more visions last night, old ruins, a tower deep underground, machines that sang like voices, but Carter didn't understand it all, not yet. He looked back at the newsfeed and froze. On the screen was a face, her face. Her hair was longer, braided in gold, her skin glowing under temple lights. The headline read, "High Princess Executed for Treason." His breath caught in his throat. He turned to her slowly, holding the tablet out. "This is you," he said quietly. Lyra looked at the screen, then down at the ground, not denying it. "You're a princess?" She nodded slowly. He laughed once, dry and confused. "Why didn't you tell me?" She made a small motion with her hand, then crossed it over her heart. "You were safer not knowing," the gesture said. Carter sat down hard, rubbing his face. "They tried to kill their own blood," he muttered, "because you wouldn't be there." "Weapon." Lyra looked away, eyes heavy with old pain. She pulled out the chip again and placed it on the ground. It flickered, showing not just maps this time, but people. Her father, the Emperor, tall and cruel, speaking to a council. "Her power is sacred, yes," he said. "But if she disobeys, she dies." Carter clenched his fists. They had locked her in golden walls, dressed her in jewels, but never treated her like a daughter, only a key. And the moment she resisted, they threw her away like broken glass. Lyra ended the vision and looked at Carter. He didn't know what to say, so he reached for her hand and held it tight. "You're not alone now," he whispered. "Not ever." Again, they rested for a few hours before moving again. This time Lyra led. She seemed to know the path by heart, though she had never walked it before. Carter followed without question. They crossed broken bridges, climbed over ruined train cars. At last, they reached a sealed hatch buried in the rock. Lyra stepped forward and placed her palm against it. The door responded with a deep hum, then opened slowly. Inside was a room that pulsed with ancient light. Machines from a forgotten age lined the walls. Some still alive, still whispering code. Carter stared in awe. "What is this place?" Lyra walked to the center where a round console waited. She placed the chip into the slot, and everything lit up. Holograms spun in the air, records, warnings, old voices long dead. One message repeated over and over. Power must choose its own path. Suddenly, a sharp sound rang through the chamber. Footsteps, heavy and cold, echoed through the stone. Carter raised his weapon, stepping in front of Lyra. 3 soldiers stepped into the light, wearing black armor marked with the Emperor's seal. The leader removed his helmet, revealing gray skin and sharp eyes. "Princess Lyra," he said calmly, "you must return with us." Carter stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere." The man ignored him, eyes locked on her. "If you resist again, we have orders to remove you permanently." Lyra stood tall, glowing softly with each breath. She pointed at the machine behind her. "This is your last warning," the soldier said, raising his weapon. Carter aimed his blaster, hand steady, heart wild. But Lyra raised her hand not in defense, but in command. The entire room shifted as if listening to her. Lights bent toward her fingers, and machines awakened like they were alive. Energy pulsed through the floor, and the soldiers took a step back. "She's controlling the entire system," the second guard whispered. The leader shouted, "Fire now!" But it was too late. Lyra's eyes burned silver, and every weapon in the room shut down. The soldiers tried to run, but the doors closed, trapping them. The chamber grew silent again. Humming softly with her power, Carter lowered his weapon and looked at her in awe. "You don't need a throne," he whispered. "You are the power." Lyra turned to him, breathing slowly. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from fear, but from freedom. For the first time, she wasn't being used, hunted, or hidden. She was standing as herself, with someone who saw her not as a tool, but as someone worth fighting for. And Carter knew then, something inside him had changed forever. Carter stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the stars blink above the ruined skyline. Smoke curled up from the ground far below, where battles had been fought and forgotten. Behind him, the door to the chamber hissed open, and Lyra stepped out. Her steps were slower now, not from fear, but from the heavy weight of what was coming next. The chamber had accepted her fully. Machines that had slept for 1,000 years now breathed because of her touch. But with that power came a price. If she stayed connected too long, it would drain her, little by little, until there was nothing left. Carter turned to her, his eyes filled with worry. "You're burning yourself out," he said. Lyra shook her head, then touched her heart. This was her purpose now, and she had accepted it. But Carter hadn't. He clenched his fists. "There has to be another way." She stepped closer and held up a small device, a beacon, glowing red. He knew what it meant. It was an escape signal. If he activated it, an old contact of his would come for him. A ship, a way out, freedom before. The Emperor's forces closed in for good, but it only had room for one. Carter stared at it in silence. He didn't speak, but the question burned inside him. Did she expect him to leave now? After everything they had survived? Lyra saw the look in his eyes. She gently pushed the beacon into his hand, then stepped back. Her message was clear. This was his choice. He could go now, live, forget this planet, forget her. And no one would blame him, but Carter wasn't ready to walk away. He thought back to when he first saw her chained, silent, her silver eyes meeting his. Back then, she was the one who needed saving. Now he realized he had been the one saved. He crushed the beacon under his boot. Lyra's eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly. "No more running," Carter said softly. "I stay. We finish this together." She stepped forward slowly and rested her forehead against his. No words were spoken, but in that silence, everything was said. They returned to the chamber, where the machines pulsed louder now. The system was preparing for a reset, a deep override that would change everything. The tower that ruled the city drew its power from these ancient veins. If Lyra triggered the override, the Emperor's control would vanish. But so would the old codes inside her, the ones her body had carried since childhood. It would set her free, but it might destroy what made her who she was. Carter stood beside her at the center console. He looked at the swirling lights, the countdown already ticking. He placed a hand over hers and said, "Whatever happens, I won't leave you." Lyra smiled faintly, but her fingers trembled. Suddenly, the chamber shook. An explosion roared from above. The soldiers had found them. The entrance collapsed in sparks and flame. Carter turned, weapon drawn, but they were too many. A voice called down from above, deep and full of steel. It was the Emperor himself, speaking through a widescreen drone. "Daughter," he said coldly, "surrender now, and I may let the Sci-F human live." Lyra stepped forward, her glow rising again. Carter looked at her and said, "Don't listen, they'll kill us both." But Lyra didn't flinch. She walked toward the console and pressed both hands to its surface. The chamber answered with a blast of energy that knocked Carter off his feet. A light shot from the core, piercing the ceiling, climbing into the sky like a signal. The Emperor's voice grew louder, angrier. "Stop this now." But Lyra didn't stop. She closed her eyes, and her entire body shimmered with power. Carter crawled toward her, calling her name. The lights around her turned golden, her form glowing too bright to see. Then suddenly, everything stopped. Silence fell across the chamber, as if time had been paused. Carter reached her side. She collapsed into his arms, breathing shallow but alive. The tower above had gone dark. The Emperor's signal had vanished. The machines around them powered down, their work complete. She had done it. She had cut the cord that bound her to the system. The city above would wake to freedom, no longer chained by one ruler's control. But at what cost? Carter held her tightly, unsure if she was still the same girl he had saved. Her eyes fluttered open, dimmer now but still full of that silver light. She whispered something not in words, but with her fingers against his chest, he understood. She was still her, weaker now, maybe forever, but free. And she had chosen to stay in this world, not as a weapon, not as a princess, but as someone finally allowed to be human. The wind felt different now, soft, clean, and full of something Carter hadn't felt in years. Peace. He stood on the rooftop of a quiet tower, looking over a city that was no longer burning, no more patrols, no more screams, no more lies pouring. From the sky, the power lines were still down. The council tower was a hollow shell, but people walked the streets without fear. Old flags had been torn down, new lights blinked gently from windows. Powered by something ancient and now free. Carter adjusted the coat draped over his shoulders. Behind him, a small fire crackled inside the rooftop shelter, and beside that fire sat Lyra. She was wrapped in a thick blanket, her legs pulled close, her silver eyes watching the stars. Her glow had faded since the override. She no longer made machines bow to her will. But her presence still quieted every room she entered, like she carried stillness in her very breath. Carter walked over and sat beside her. They didn't speak, not at first. He handed her a cup of hot liquid from a small pot he'd boiled. She took it with both hands and sipped slowly. For a while, they just watched the stars return to the night sky. And Carter wondered how many of those stars were watching them back. He finally spoke. "They're rebuilding already," Lyra nodded. A small smile curling on her lips, he turned to her, more serious now. "They want you to lead," he said, "to guide the new system." She looked down at her cup, thinking. He continued, "But I know that's not what you want." She reached for the dirt near the fire and drew a small symbol. It was the same shape she used when he first met her. A circle crossed by light, a symbol of self, of freedom. She pointed at it, then at him, then back to her heart. Carter's throat tightened. "You don't want a throne," he said softly. "You want a life." She smiled again and leaned gently against his shoulder. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't heavy, it was warm. He placed his arm around her, careful and slow. "You saved this world," he whispered, "and somehow you saved me too." She turned her head toward him, her face inches from his. The fire's light danced in her eyes, and in that moment, the stars seemed closer. Her hand reached for his, fingers lacing together naturally. No machines, no weapons, no powers. Just a human and an alien girl who had once been a prisoner. Now free, now safe, now whole, and somewhere between running and fighting, they had found each other. He leaned forward, not with force, not with pressure, but with care. She met him halfway. Their lips touched like the closing of a book written in fire and silence. A story finished not with war, but with breath. The kiss was brief, soft, and filled with all the words they had never needed to say. When it ended, she rested her head on his chest, and he held her there. Beneath the quiet sky, no promises, no plans, just presence. The next day, they walked together into the valley. Not to rule, not to command, but to live. Among people who didn't know her name and didn't care what she once was. Carter took a job fixing old systems. Lyra helped grow new plants that powered clean energy. They built a home made of scrap and sunlight, simple, warm, and untouched by war. People came sometimes, asking for her guidance. She would listen, smile, and point them to someone else. She had done enough. It was time for her to rest. One evening, years later, Carter stood at the same rooftop, now overgrown with flowers. He watched Lyra and a group of children laughing near a water stream. They called her teacher, not princess, not weapon, just Lyra. He smiled, lifting a small photo from his coat pocket. It showed them the day they planted their first tree. In the background was the broken tower, now covered in moss and vines, forgotten by history, but remembered by hearts. Carter whispered into the wind, "She wasn't meant to be saved." He said, "She was meant to save us," and she did. In ways no one would ever fully understand, but he did, and he would remember always.